Good morning, Bellator Nation. It's the fabulous Bellator boy, Jack Slack, coming at you with the Jack Slack podcast, your number one source for Bellator news and bollocks. Breaking news being slid across my desk right now. New Bellator rankings have come out, and there have been a couple of shocking developments. Men's pound for pound, Emmanuel Sanchez last week, number 8, because he was fighting Patricio Pitbull. Suddenly, not a pound for pound member. No more. You lose to number 1 pound for pound, you're a fucking nobody. Get out. Regional champ Gegard Mousasi holds strong at number 3 pound for pound, while the closer Corey Anderson, coming off a week in which he claimed he was paid more than $1 million per fight to take on a chubby Melvin Manhoef and a guy no one's heard of, surges into 8th place. Phil Davis down to number 9, with Yaroslav Amosov coming in at number 10, having climbed the welterweight division rankings to a place above Michael Page. Women's featherweight is going strong with 10 ranked members in the division, the bare minimum, and Sinead Kavanagh in at number 5. Meanwhile, in Bellator's tentpole middleweight division, Charlie Ward falls just short of the top 5 at number 7, but is well within striking distance of the title shot. Most notably, Jake Hager, fresh off the 3rd victory of his career, enters the men's heavyweight rankings at number 10. That's been your Bellator Roundup. I'm Jack Slack. Let's talk about fights that matter. Actually, while we're on the subject of that, Corey Anderson said that he was paid more in 2 fights with Bellator than his entire UFC career. UFC obviously lobbied Nevada to not release purses, but disclosed income, Corey Anderson has about $950,000 in the UFC, which means that if he's earned double that in 2 fights, he's being paid $1 million a fight to fight a chubbed up Melvin Manhoef at the age of 60. So, I mean, if he's pulled that off, firstly, Bellator, wow, way to spend your money. But secondly, petition to change his nickname from whatever bullshit he changed it to after 25-8. Corey Anderson is now Corey the Closer. And the moment that I can do a Corey Anderson voice, he's going to become a beloved character on this podcast, joining the pantheon of greats like Haggler's Marvin Marvler, the New York Jew who refuses to pay full price for anything, and Bustin Perrier, the flamboyant homosexual. I just used my normal voice for that one. Right, what we do? We got a pay-per-view this weekend, and it's. I said last week. I said on Monday, but it's a weird one. It's one of those ones where if you are, and I don't want to do the hardcore fight fan thing. I don't want to pretend I'm better than anyone who's going to pay for this card. But if you watch a lot of fights and you want to see Kamaru Usman fight interesting people in the welterweight division, this main event probably doesn't do much for you. But, I'm willing to discuss it in not willing. I mean, I'm going to discuss it in the way that we should, which is giving Masvidal a fair shot. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. I've been liking lots of people being like, meme tweeting about how it's going to be another 50-45 or whatever. But, the first one was fairly short notice. Masvidal came in to save. Was that the Burns fight that fell through? And we've since done the Burns fight, and Masvidal sat out and basically, had been told that he was getting something to say thanks. And unwittingly, he has become, the biggest pay-per-view star that the UFC has, or did, very, very briefly. We've talked about that so much, but just an incredible run of luck and events and just sort of things falling together. This guy who, for most of his career, and I don't want to say journeyman in like a disrespectful way, I always enjoyed watching Jorge Masvidal fight, and he was always one of those guys where you like, if you could just put it together. The whole thing was like he really would rest on his laurels and then lose a split decision to someone like Lawrence Larkin. That's I say it every time, but that's such a great fight. Not in like an absolute banger sort of way, but just 2 really technically good guys having a really good, technically good fight on an undercard that no one gave a shit about. And the same was true of like Masvidal versus James Krause. You could make a second welterweight division that's just technically good guys no one cares about, and Masvidal was in it. We've said it before, but Masvidal was Leon Edwards, and there wasn't anything to grab onto for people who need big finishes and stuff. That's what wins fans over. And then he did the Till one, fight where he was losing and then came back and knocked Till out. And then he knocked out Ben Askren off the first strike of the fight, and that went viral, obviously. And then he fought Nate Diaz, who, again, not really done anything in forever, especially not at welterweight. Feel free to chime in with how the McGregor fights were at welterweight and therefore. But rewatching that first matchup between Usman and Masvidal, I was, I think I've heard the heavy hands boys say it, and I think I've joked about it before too. But like, the idea that Masvidal just decided to start punching people hard because he wasn't a knockout artist before this, and there was a little bit of that in this Usman fight. There wasn't an awful lot of jabbing, which has been one of his great strengths. I genuinely think he has one of the nicest jabs in MMA, or did. But he landed some. I'm not saying that he didn't land any at all, but it was not such a central weapon of his game. And I think that reflected his sort of desire to get a knockout in that fight, and perhaps worrying about the cardio in the later rounds. But, we've always talked about how wrestling, or good wrestling, puts it puts bigger stakes on every exchange. So where a lot of the time you would be better if you can, defending takedowns, establishing the jab and starting to work off that and building from there. Obviously, the more time you spend in the clinch, the more time you've lost if you're the striker, the less inclined you're going to be to start point scoring and establishing a jab. The more you're going to be trying to take their head off with every exchange. And that really plays into the game of most wrestlers, because the more you commit, the more you're squaring up your hips and going on top of them when they level change onto you. Or under you, whatever. That ticking clock that the wrestler establishes early. And you could see that in Masvidal. There was a lot of swinging big. He was doing tons of those. That shifting right hand that he knocked out Till with, or shifting left hand, whatever it was. He changed stances to do it. And everyone was like, damn, that shifting right hand or whatever. He did that about 10 times against Usman. And every time he telegraphed it enormously by jogging on the spot to do it. And Usman would just duck under it and clinch him. Whereas if you watch Masvidal at his most journeyman-y, but also, some of his best work, lots and lots of jabbing. And his his power weapons have always been the body kicks. Monstrous body kicker. One of the very few good body kickers in the sport. Though I think the last time I did a Filthy Casuals guide on him, Fiziev hadn't turned up yet, and he is a monstrous body kicker. But Masvidal, one of the things that always stood out about him was because he's very confident defending takedowns. He's got that American top team background. He was willing to body kick more often. If you watch the fights with Ally Quinta, just lights him up with body kicks. But the American top team style, I've always thought that it's particularly poorly suited to these, specifically the two top guys of lightweight and welterweight at the moment. Well, I keep saying at the moment, but Khabib is retired. But Khabib and Usman excel with their opponent on the fence and wall walking and just keep dragging them down or stick to them. It's not like if you're grappling someone like Rustam Habilov or someone like that who wants to take you out into the center of the cage, and if you get up on the fence, they go, oh, fuck, I've lost him now. The American top team style of, if you get taken down, scoot your butt to the fence and stand up. It has that flaw where if the guy just wants to keep you on the fence and keep hitting short trips and doing minimal work, not minimal work, I mean, obviously it's a grind, but the guy doesn't want huge amplitude takedowns. He just wants to keep chopping you down to your butt and then making you stand up again. And if your style of counter wrestling is to put yourself on the fence and get up, that plays into that. Meanwhile, Usman obviously not been resting on his laurels since the first fight. Just took on Gilbert Burns, looked phenomenal in that bout. Got clipped by Gilbert Burns, but the main takeaway was jab looking better than ever off both stances. Work with Whitman seems to really be paying off. And we talked about it on Monday about how Ben Askren was saying that he hated taking people down on the fence, and that's a real contrast with Usman and Khabib, who really like taking people down on the fence. But even, it's just so nice that there is no one correct way to do MMA. It's what we all love about the sport, or, certainly what I love about the sport. But you got so many guys trending towards, the head outside single and avoiding the head inside single because of, you can end up underneath the dude, as Francis Ngannou demonstrated against Stipe Miocic. But Usman still loves the head inside single, still loves the head on the chest, pick up the high single. For everything that can go wrong, there's always an upside to attempting it, and there's ways of avoiding that specific thing going wrong. In terms of game plan, you got to say do the same again for Usman because he won the first so convincingly. Always a bit worrying how when you watch a really good wrestler getting confident in their hands, you always think, oh, are you opening yourself up here? But as long as he's level changing often, and picking up legs and entering clinches and just threatening takedowns all the time. The only thing that can happen to your boxing from threatening more takedowns is that you hit the person more. Like, it's just a win-win situation. For Masvidal, I suppose, I'd like to see him. Obviously, Usman, great gas tank, but I would like to see him try and drag this late. And if he wants to finish in the fourth or fifth. First round or two, just circle the cage, work on the ring craft, try to establish the jab. One of the reasons that I'm always preaching the jab is that it's harder to get a hold of someone when they're jabbing well. If you're coming out and throwing especially switching punches and things like that, but if you're swinging for people's heads, you are giving them the clinch a lot easier than if you're flicking out the jab, which is, your longest hand or upper body strike. The kicks are obviously longer than punches, but you don't have the same stability. If you are kicking, doesn't matter if you're, think of a shit kicker, Daniel Cormier, or Borkow, for the moment that you are kicking, you're on one leg. It's a time when you can't be engaged in moving in another direction. Whereas jabbing boxing generally tends to keep you on both feet, which is nice, but the jab, especially because you're not throwing your body weight into it, unless you are. I mean, you get the choice to, but you can jab while moving in pretty much any direction. And then I'd like to see the body kicks established slowly through the rounds and see if you can, tire him out and knock him out late. With Usman, the problem is always going to be avoiding the fence. He puts constant pressure on people, doesn't do a lot of very low diving shots. That was again a difference between him and Khabib. Khabib would come in on a low single and chase you up to the fence if he felt so inclined. That meant that even if you were standing within, I think it's against Gaethje. Gaethje's within the black octagon on the floor, and he dives on this low single and just chases him up to the fence. Certainly did it against Michael Johnson. Whereas Usman tends to do sort of lower amplitude takedowns, just ducking in on single legs, ducking into clinches and things. He will level change. He did a nice all the way to the knees shot on Masvidal in the first fight, and he took him down in the center of the cage as well. But I think most of people's problems with Usman come with him backing them up to the fence. Now, that's not to say that Masvidal didn't try the first time, because he was circling out on Nate Diaz very easily in their fight. But Nate Diaz is one of the worst ring generals in MMA history at that level. At that level of striking competence, but also massive hole in the game there. Whereas Usman pretty good at cutting the cage, and just the amount of pressure he puts on people really forces them to hit the fence eventually. I did like Masvidal's knees in the clinches in their first fight. If he can try and frame off Usman so that when Usman enters on clinches, he's that slightly longer clinch where you can get off some knees, I could see that working well for him. And then really it's what are you going to do when you hit your back? Because if you scoot to the fence, you got the issue of being tied up there. As we say every time, the wall walk is so powerful and everyone is so good at it now that it doesn't matter if you're under Usman or Khabib. If you're a top 10 fighter, you will probably at some point get up. Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor both got up from underneath Khabib, but then what have you achieved? You're on the fence. It's not like Chuck Liddell's days when you'd come up, you'd have the underhook, and they wouldn't really be able to hold you on the fence. There are still fighters who take you down, and then you get up on the fence, and then they go, "Oh fuck, that's that done." Then you circle off. It's the disengaging part that's incredibly hard. So can Masvidal work his stand-ups and things out in the center of the cage? Has he found a new way to break away? The American Top Team, really good team. If anyone's going to work it out, they've got as good a shot as anyone. And I think low kicks are another sort of underrated facet of attacking Usman. Unfortunately, Masvidal tried to low kick right off the bat in the last one and immediately got taken down off it, because he's pretty good at parrying kicks across. He does exactly what Masvidal did against Cerrone. If you parry the kick across and then you enter afterwards, except instead of trying to hook people in the head, he's taken them down. But Usman has, been very open about his own issues with his knees. It's not exactly hidden. He doesn't do an awful lot of really athletic level changing. I don't think he even runs. As someone, I was doing tons of running at the start of the lockdown and somehow banged up my knee. And since then I've been on we call it the cross trainer in England, but the elliptical. And it's just so much easier on the knee. And you're hearing lots and lots of fighters, particularly from wrestling backgrounds, are being more open about the fact that they don't run, they just do elliptical. I know that Stipe is one, Usman is one. I mean, I shout it out every time, but Joel Jameson, who wrote one of the best books on conditioning, strength and conditioning, that I've ever read, specifically for MMA, but just generally, he wrote an article a long time ago called Roadwork 2.0, which was just like, doesn't matter how you get your heart rate up, you know, and I think he was working with AMC Pancration at the time, so he was Demetrius Johnson's conditioning coach, Rich Franklin's conditioning coach, Tim Boich, you know, all guys who are known for pretty much coming in shape. Hayato Sakurai back in the day. But his thing was just like low intensity, sustained state cardio, lots and lots and lots of it. Breaking it up, you know, you do 15 minutes on the treadmill, you do 15 minutes on the elliptical, you do 15 minutes on the bike, you do, you know, and you just keep it fresh so you're not bored to death doing it. But anyway, we're on to cardio now, and you know, no amount of training is going to give you Kamaru Usman's cardio, I'm afraid. There is a certain amount of, well, I mean, it's genetics and trained genetics. You know, it's not he's born to be a better cardio fighter than you. It's that he's born and he's also training super hard. So I somehow talked myself into caring about this fight. It's the same with Masvidal that it is with basically any fighter that gets popular. They suck up like an excessively large amount of the air in like combat sports conversation. So you just hear so much about them. You're like, I'm so fucking sick of it. You know, just can we not talk about some of the other awesome fighters that there are at welterweight ready to come up and fight Usman? And how many of them how many top welterweights he's already beaten. But no, we're still doing super necessary and 3-piece and soda. You know, you're going, come on. Memes move quicker than ever, but combat sports memes are just, they for some reason, they're incredibly stagnant. But yes, you know, excited to see that. Masvidal's still an extremely good fighter, in spite of just being one of the weirdest online personas. And, you know, we can't talk about this without bringing up how not real it is to assault someone backstage and then refuse to fight them. You know, I really want that Masvidal-Edwards fight. I think that'd be, more than anything, just a fascinating style matchup. Edwards has got Diaz now, which is just a really strange fight. But honestly, like, instead of this fight, I would have rather seen Stephen Thompson fight Kamaru Usman. Not only, you know, he might not have the streak of wins that lots of guys do. Well, actually, there aren't really a lot of streaks going at the moment in the welterweight division. But, you know, he's getting on, and he's still got a very interesting style against Kamaru Usman specifically, because he's so good at defending takedowns, and so much of his game is the footwork and staying off the cage. I think that's a fascinating matchup. Unfortunately, Stephen Thompson doesn't give us a lot of memes. Stephen Thompson hasn't just seen Scarface and decided it's his entire personality. They got a new one coming out, supposedly with Zac Efron, but I feel like that every few weeks I read about some beloved property that's being remade or reimagined with Zac Efron as the star. Live action Akira, anyone? But yeah, how funny would that be? You know, just the moment that Zac Efron Scarface comes out, Masvidal has to drop the gimmick altogether. Actually, he's pretty cringe, so probably wouldn't. But anyway, best of luck to him. It would be interesting. It would be interesting if we got a bit of a shake-up in the top end of welterweight. And then we got two women's title fights, which is... actually, the more I think about it, the more I do care about Shevchenko versus Andrade. We'll do Shevchenko versus Andrade first. Valentina Shevchenko, obviously, the most complete human being in MMA, could be a billionaire, chooses not to be. She's charitably donating her talents to the UFC and to us. Obviously not lost since the last fight to Nunes. They created an entire division for her. She's undefeated as the flyweight champion. I think she's their third flyweight champion or something, isn't she? Oh, no, second. They gave it to Nico Montano, and then that fight just never happened. But the last one was basically a shutout against Jennifer Maia. Didn't Jennifer Maia get her down at one point? Wasn't that the intrigue of it? But, Jennifer Maia, we all knew beforehand, wasn't an awesome fighter. You know, this is the interesting thing. There are about, and I'm going to caveat this with, like, just in case anyone's going to come and be like, that's sexist. No, I hold women's fights to exactly the same standard as men's fights, which is why I'm not like, well, didn't they do well for women? You know, in terms of like technical, tactical, strategic ability in the cage, there's like 15, 20 good women in the world. At the moment, I hope there will be more. But you got 4 of them in action on this card, so that's not bad. I mean, Jessica Andrade isn't even that technically or tactically good, but she's fucking powerful, which is interesting. But Rose versus Weili, I mean, I can't remember if her family name's Weili or Zhang. and someone's going to get mad about that. But anyway, Zhang versus Namajunas, that is really chef's kiss matchmaking. Oh, it's a title fight, so the matchmaking doesn't really play into it that much, but it's just top tier matchup. But we're talking about Andrade versus Shevchenko. The intrigue is Andrade's Hulk strength, how Valentina plays from the bottom. We saw her underneath Maya for a bit, but a lot of Valentina's ground game, I don't want to diss it, but a lot of the time she gets the takedown and just sort of holds. She has a habit of holding like side control with the opponent having an underhook. Like if you watch the Jędrzejczyk fights, she does the awesome clinch trip, and then she's in side control, and Jędrzejczyk has the underhook. And at that point, Jędrzejczyk's going to turn to the single because that's what you do from there. But she just sort of pins her flat and waits for a while before it happens. There wasn't really any transitioning or mitigating that threat by like underhooking the leg or anything. She's got a weird sort of grappling game. But yes, I mean, we don't see a lot of interesting takedowns attempted against her. And if there's one thing Andrade will do, it's try to pick you up with a fucking high crotch and throw you across the ring. I mean, she's not the most technical wrestler in MMA, but she is one of the most powerful takedown artists in women's MMA. I think the reason that I don't give Andrade a terrific chance in this one is that while she has enormous power, she has all the physical attributes and talent that she could be a lot better than she is. I think a lot of it is the coaching. She might not be, she might not be very trainable. She just might not learn. I mean, you saw in her last one, she made a lot of, she'd been told to move her head a lot. She'd been training to move her head a lot, and she was moving her head a lot, and it was resulting in a much tougher fight for Rose. The first fight, Rose just couldn't miss her. Second fight, Rose was having a lot more trouble, and as the fight wore on, Andrade started to come into her own. But whoever is training her boxing and kickboxing, she doesn't really have any kickboxing. Whoever's training her striking is, I feel, not succeeding with her. Because yes, she's found out how to hit the body, which is fantastic because she does, so few people hit the body well in MMA generally. And in women's MMA, it's almost unheard of. And Andrade is out there knocking people out with body shots like Chikagian. But the huge issues in Andrade's game are that she's always shorter and stockier than her opponent, even at strawweight. She used to fight bantamweight back in the day, which is crazy. But she's always shorter and stockier than her opponent. She's always at a reach disadvantage. She's always at a height disadvantage. She wants to close the distance and hit them because she's always got the power advantage. And she does it in a way that isn't conducive to closing the distance at all. I mean, yes, she was moving her head in the last one, and that opened up some doors for her. But until her last fight, and she's like 20, 30 fights deep in her career by now. Yeah, 29 fights on her record. Until her last one, she was still leaning back and trying to parry every punch that came at her with her right hand. I talked about Paulo Costa doing it against Israel Adesanya. A bit more understandable for him because he's a big, tall guy who just overwhelms people. But Jessica Andrade is trying to close the distance while pulling her head back, and that just doesn't work. You're doing, your method doesn't match, your means doesn't match your end. And you can watch that with the fights against, the first one against Rose, the fight against Jędrzejczyk. She just gets jabbed up because she, once she's having trouble with it, she starts leaning back more to try and deal with it. And that keeps her out of the kitchen. What she should be doing is getting under it, getting inside it. Someone to look at would be like Ross Pearson. Obviously, still had a lot of trouble with kickers, but he was able to use his head movement effectively to close the distance and land the left hook more than anyone in MMA, probably. And also used kicks of his own as well, which is such a missing element of Andrade's game. The inside low kick could be carrying her to the inside on these lasses so easily. She did it once against Jessica Penne. She did it a couple of times against Jędrzejczyk and had enough success that you were like, that would work if you kept doing it, but didn't have enough success to actually keep doing it. It didn't work it didn't cause the knockout, so I'm just giving up on it. But yeah, if she had a step up inside low kick, she could just come down swinging. She could do Dan Henderson was slow as molasses his entire career, even for a light heavyweight. But he held people in place by kicking their lead leg. Because you either kick their lead leg while they're backing up and pick it off the floor so that you can catch up to them, or you kick and they pick their leg up and then they're on one leg again, so they're not moving backwards. And Jessica Andrade actually dropped Caitlin Chikagian with the first low kick she threw. It was an outside low kick to the lead leg, threw her on her ass with it. And the commentators even said, she doesn't throw low kicks, but she should. So yeah, that's the thing. Andrade, if you have power, and we're going to talk about this with Zhang Weili in a minute, if you have power in women's MMA, like actual knockout power, you have an enormous advantage. This isn't like middleweight MMA where everyone can hit. I mean, honestly, lightweight division, hard to get to the top end if you can't hit now. Certainly you're going to meet a lot of hitters on the way up. Listen to me, becoming Nick Diaz, talk about hitters. But there aren't any hitters in most of women's MMA, in all of the divisions. Amanda Nunes is not a technical savant, but she seems to have like manpower in the women's division, and you can see people freeze up in front of her because they don't know what to do. And Jessica Andrade has that kind of power, but T-Rex arms and an inability to close the distance. Like, a lot of her best work has come when people grab a double collar tie on her, which is not a great position for most people, to be honest, but she still manages to bang them on the chin. Part of the intrigue in this one is that Valentina is a southpaw, so the jab, I mean, it could still be a massive issue for Andrade, because I haven't seen her against many southpaws, haven't seen a hand fight, but it'll be different to the jab she normally deals with. There's also the fact that Valentina is a very low output fighter compared to Rose Namajunas, and especially compared to Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Just going to refill my tea, 1 second. As I was saying, Valentina Shevchenko, fucking bum, no. So some of the intrigue here is, can Andrade, by repeatedly trying to get to the inside, force a higher pace on Valentina Shevchenko and make more happen? Now, obviously, there's the risk of being Jessica I and just sort of running in straight lines and getting circled off and body kicked. And Andrade's cage cutting, I wouldn't call it super elite, but it's serviceable. And you have to wonder how comfortable Shevchenko is going to be unleashing the left body kick and high kick against someone whose whole goal is to grab your leg. I think this is a fight that, in another world where Jessica Andrade had good coaches and training partners who forced her to train to maximize her strengths and to not just sort of run after people, I think this is a very winnable fight for Jessica Andrade talent-wise, but I don't think she has any of the technical or tactical abilities necessary to stop Valentina Shevchenko from just circling off and rendering her fairly unpredictable and ineffective. Really, for me, like the questions in this one are not like, has Jessica Andrade done anything to force exchanges and to make use of her incredible power and strength, but rather, can her flailing after Shevchenko for 3 rounds tire Shevchenko out? Can she drive a pace on Shevchenko where Shevchenko goes into the 4th and 5th rounds not as sharp as she was in the first 3? I'll tell you how you'll know if Andrade is succeeding. If Shevchenko starts throwing that Superman punch off the fence over and over and over again. Because that's what she did when Nunes was backing her up. She just kept trying to jump in through, like, over her head. She was throwing, jumping punches from Street Fighter. But yeah, I mean, probably talent-wise and ability-wise, one of the stiffer tests of Valentina Shevchenko, certainly at flyweight. But I think this is one where you're going to see the technique matters, and Jessica Andrade hasn't learned enough from whoever she's training with. I mean, her main sparring partner is apparently Priscilla Cachoeira, so she probably doesn't have to work that hard to find her. And I say all of that as a massive fanboy for Jessica Andrade and someone who absolutely loathes the Valentina Shevchenko fan base. And then my personal favourite fight on this card, Weili Zhang versus Rose Namajunas. I used to say that Marlos Kunin was the best groomed fighter in women's MMA, but I think Rose Namajunas probably wins the. It was a choice. Do I make libertarian jokes about Pat Barry after their really weird appearance on the JRE, or do I save them for Valentina's incredibly creepy coach, her childhood coach and mentor, who also married her sister? Martial arts, why you like that? But anyway, fight, fucking fantastic. We won't. I was gonna do a whole enemy of communism thing, like the Sam Alvey thing, but Rose Namajunas is actually good, so it doesn't really work. But yeah, this is. I was gonna say the CCCP, whatever the Chinese equivalent is, versus Murica. No, really, it's shit hot technical striker versus good technical striker with insane power, with manpower for women's division. Like if you, I was rewatching that Jędrzejczyk Zhang fight, and so much of it is just that Zhang can fucking crack. She's doing well, she's keeping up with her, she's countering and stuff, but it helps that every one punch she lands wins the exchange against 4 punches from Jędrzejczyk, because it just, it snaps her head around and causes enormous swellings on her forehead. I think there is something weird about Joanna's face that makes her prone to things like that, because you remember she got hit with one from Jessica Andrade that did exactly the same thing, just swelled her forehead up. And you don't see an awful lot of like those big hematomas on people's foreheads. They tend to be, well, boxing and mainly from headbutts, to be honest. But this one, I'm writing something right now, and I should have it up after the podcast about Rose Namajunas, just talking about, well, examining the idea of long rhythm and short rhythm, which I think is sort of an underdeveloped idea. You see it mentioned a lot, like coaches will talk about long rhythm fighters like Ali, is the classic example where you bounce in and out, back from front foot to back foot. That's your long rhythm. And then there's fighters who move from left to right, like Joe Frazier is the obvious example, but head side to side. It basically, long rhythm, short rhythm is, imagine your idle animation. If you're playing Tekken, what is the thing that you're just doing so that you're starting from a moving start? I mean, that's the reason for it in fighting. You want to be moving your head a little bit all the time, just in case the opponent comes in on you fast and they've just got a little bit harder time because you're a moving target, a slightly moving target. But also, it's way easier to get moving if you're already moving, as opposed to standing static. And also, the telegraph on a static, going from completely static to attacking is so much more noticeable. But the reason that I was going to talk about long rhythm and short rhythm is because Namajunas has sort of like 2 modes. And one of them is when she's on the outside and she's bouncing her lead foot in and out, which we call a fake entry. And that's something that, we're going to be talking about it soon with Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 3. But it's the way to deal with not only calf kicks, the current scourge of MMA, but oblique kicks and low-line side kicks, the previous scourge of the moment of MMA. If guys are trying to target your lead leg, putting your lead leg in and out and not making it, like if you come in from your stance and you hold your stance the entire time and you move in the traditional textbook manner, your lead foot is the first thing to enter. And that's true as well if you're bouncing between like feet level and 1 foot forward, but that lead foot's going to be taken away again. Dominic Cruz did it tons. The guy that I'm referencing in this article a lot is Jimmy Wild. He wrote a book where he was like, yeah, ideally, your right foot doesn't move at all. All your retreating is done just with your lead foot, which just means coming back to level, which is crazy. But you'll see a lot of it. And it was part of the reason, like, it's such a big move. You think, well, what if I step back to level and then I bounce back with my lead foot in again? I've got to step into my stance and then step into an attack, which seems like double the movement. So you'd think that's crazy. But then you realize that there's such a big movement as your, I'm going to say it again, but idle animation, as your basic bouncing in and out, that really numbs people's perception of what you're doing. If you watch Namajunas against Jędrzejczyk, the first one, and also, to a degree in the second one, but and against Kowalkiewicz, but in the first one especially, it's amazing that against someone who has impressive kickboxing accolades, has been in with people like Valentina Shevchenko and held her own, but Rose Namajunas basically waltzes up and hits her on the chin, and she doesn't react. Like, she doesn't flinch or start to move until way too late. And that's that long rhythm, going in and out of stance. I don't think I explained the rhythm thing very well, but basically the reason that they're the same thing, like, you'd think one is bouncing your feet and the other one is moving your head, but they're the same thing because in both, you are moving your weight from one foot to the other and back as you're sort of like getting ready to go. And this is true in like Muay Thai as well. If you watch someone like, Skarbowski just did a DVD on it, but he's always talking about moving from one foot to the other constantly. The guys, the young kids in Thailand are on the tires. You get a tire and you don't hit it with a sledgehammer. That's MMA training. You stand on the tire and you bounce your feet back and forward, and you're always like up on the balls of your feet and moving. But yes, long rhythm versus short rhythm is just like whether you're moving back and forward in your stance from left foot to right foot, or you're squaring up a bit and moving from left to right in your stance, left foot to right foot. Your feet are always going to be left or right. You're moving between them. But if you're in a long bladed stance on the outside, you're moving back and forward when you rock your weight from foot to foot. And if you're more square on, you're moving left to right from foot to foot, which is more conducive to moving your head. So when you'll see Namajunas in other parts of her fights, she'll establish her stance and she'll start moving her head, and that's when you go, oh yeah, she's actually got really good head movement. But she really gets into her stance first. She spreads her feet, her stance is a lot squarer, as in like rather than just like length towards the opponent, I mean like a cross as well. So it's wider in that direction. And when she does that, she moves ahead a lot, and she uses right hand leads an awful lot, which I really love. But she flick out that right hand lead, which she does lots of like shoulder feints and then throws the right hand lead, which was another Muhammad Ali classic. He'd throw the shoulder feint with the left, shoulder feint with the right, and not throw anything, and then he'd just pump his right hand from that position with his shoulders already squared. But Namajunas will throw the right hand lead to set up the jab again. You know, her long rhythm stuff is bouncing in and out and then coming in with a big jab. And her short rhythm stuff is using the right hand lead and her head movement to, again, skewer people with the jab. And she does a lot of pivoting off with the jab, like the safety lead, which puts you back on like a bladed stance again. So, yeah, really interesting. Like, if you watch the third, fourth round with Jędrzejczyk, she really starts to crack her with right hand leads just onto the guard. She's not even bothered. She's just flicking them out there to touch the guard of Jędrzejczyk, and then coming up the middle with the jab. And the jab is the power punch. It's like the Kovalev thing. Or Ngannou, you know, knocked down Miocic with a stiff jab, or knocked him down. Did I say knocked down? Yeah. You know, that load your hips, or coiling and then jabbing, really powerful. And Kovalev made a career out of it, but throwing like a half-assed right hand that the opponent, you make sure they definitely see it coming, and that squares your hips to throw the powerful left jab up the middle. But when she's doing that long rhythm stuff, one of the interesting things about it, and I'm going to talk about this in the article, go read the article if you're a patron, not only are you making it so that if the opponent tries to kick at your leg, they've got a great chance of missing and you come back in on them, like she did against Jędrzejczyk a lot, you're also, if the opponent is going to try and kick you when you step in, you can step out. You don't have to step straight towards them. You can step out into the kick and hit him with the right hand, which is what she was doing against Andrade in their second fight. And the other thing that I really like about that, going between, you know, bouncing the lead foot in and then back to your rear foot and then back in again, you know, that lengthening and shortening of the stance, is that when she was doing it against Andrade, the answer to Andrade trying to duck in on a clinch or grab the high crotch that she really likes is to retract your lead leg and frame off her neck and chest. And she was able to do that really well and land knees. And there's like other stuff about like the galloping retreat, which we get into, and that was something we talked about with the Sean O'Malley piece the other week. And yeah, I'll talk more about it in that article. But honestly, I think this fight, the difference will be probably if Namajunas can keep the fight long and work from the outside and score her jab and stuff, and her nice low kicks and so on, and get Weili Zhang into a kickboxing match, I think she's got a great chance. Sorry, losing my voice because I've been talking too much. And I also swallowed a bit of shortbread the wrong way. But, you know, we'll blame talking. I'm actually working too hard. But as I was saying, yeah, I think the longer she can make this fight, the more she gets Weili Zhang to rely on like that nice inside low kick. You know, before she was monstrous knockout artist in the UFC, she'd beaten a ton of nobodies in China. And then she came to the UFC and fought people like, what was her name? Danielle, whatever. The really short cop with the massive thighs. And Tisha Torres and people like that. You know, short people, but in all those fights, she was really just trying to inside low kick him. And then if she missed the inside low kick, she'd side kick him. And that was basically all I could pick up from her style then. And then she fought Andrade and smashed her on the inside. And then suddenly she's this enormous hitter and got mad confidence, and she's counterpunching effectively against the incredibly formidable Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So I think like if Namajunas can keep her out of her power and have one of those awkward kickboxing matches, because I mean Zhang, you watch her first 3 fights in the UFC. I mean she choked some lass, I can't remember that, but a couple of those ones, the ones where she's just kickboxing on the outside, she could have lost the decisions. She wasn't like impressing anyone. And I think that's the sort of fight that Rose Namajunas can win. I think the sort of fight Rose Namajunas loses is one where she gets drawn into power exchanges. Problem is, she tends to get more into the working at close range the more the fight goes on, because her style, like that bouncing and stuff, very energy consuming. So you saw it in the later rounds against Jędrzejczyk the second time. You saw it in the third round against Andrade, just the last fight. The longer the fight goes, the more she ends up trading with people in range. But I think this is a terrific fight. You've got two fighters who are very, very skilled in very, very different ways, but also in the same area. Anyway, read the article. I'll have the link up the moment that I've written it. Well, no, I've finished writing it. I've written most of it. But I'll have the link up. It's a Patreon Boy exclusive, and it helps me do the podcast and eat too much shortbread. Man, I've done like an hour on just those 3 fights, and I wasn't even too hype about 2 of them. So what we got? Chris Weidman versus Uriah Hall rematch of a very, very old fight. I don't know if I couldn't find footage of it the other day. I was looking for it because it's a great example of cutting someone off with a left hook. Because one of Uriah Hall's problems has always been getting stuck along the fence and circling a lot along the fence with his hands down. And that came back against Paulo Costa even. It's a real issue for him. But that Weidman was like the first one. That Weidman fight was the first one where he got knocked out. That was a tournament, and I think Ong Lashong was in it as well. Like, real weird, low-level tournament with guys who went on to be fairly big names. Well, the biggest name in Myanmar history, if you believe ONE FC. Anthony Smith versus Jimmy Crute. That could be fun, actually. Anthony Smith, as long as he's not in the main event scene, I'll watch him. He just beat... what's his name? Whack him, bruv. Oh no, I'm thinking fucking Darren Stewart. No, he beat Devin Clark. Devin Clark of swinging past Jan Blachowicz and getting standing rear naked choked like in a Steven Seagal film fame. But Jimmy Crute's been like someone I have enjoyed watching for a while. Suffered a loss to Misha Serkinov. That's almost 2 years ago now. But he was doing really well. I mean, he beat Sam Alvey and advanced the cause of global Marxism. But before that, he'd beaten Paul Craig largely in the grappling, which was very impressive, using the Kimura wonderfully as a way to turn him over. But in his last 2, he picked up another Kimura victory over the guy whose name I can never say, Mikhail Alexijuk, and then he beat Modestus Bukakas by round 1 knockout. So yeah, he's on a little rebound. He was supposed to fight Johnny Walker, but yeah, Anthony Smith will do. As far as light heavyweight fights, I think that's an appropriate use, in the middle of the card. Something fun. It's going to be a tire fire either way. And there's a mystery box in the middle of the fire that could either contain dog shit or fireworks. And, you just have to tune in and work out what it is. What else is going on? Randy Brown versus Alex Oliveira? Yeah, like it. I can't let a mention of Alex Oliveira happen on this podcast without being like, and he's going to cheat his ass off because he's probably the dirtiest fighter in the UFC. But in a fun way. Brendan Allen versus Carl Roberson, yeah, fine. Yeah, no, not an awful lot going on in this card. I suppose part of the interest is that you've got a number of Chinese fighters coming in on the undercard, like Na Liang entering the women's strawweight division, Qileng Aori entering the men's bantamweight division, Zhu Rong, who I believe was in Dynasty Warriors, but entering the lightweight division. And then you've got a Mongolian fighter in here. Yeah, I mean, you can see what they're doing here. I'm not saying that in like a Brendan Schaub. Yeah, we hear you, CBS or whoever it was. We know you're not racist. No, I mean, I think that makes sense. Put some Chinese fighters on the undercard because you're going to have a large Chinese viewership, I imagine. And nationalism or patriotism or whatever you want to call it is always been a big thing in MMA. If the Irish hadn't bandwagoned on Conor McGregor so hard, MMA wouldn't have had that massive growth spurt. Other stuff happening this weekend. John Lineker is fighting Troy Worthen, who I don't know. But on the same card, you got, this is in ONE, by the way, you got Yuya Wakamatsu, who may or may not be better than every flyweight in the UFC because he gave Demetrius Johnson a good fight when Demetrius Johnson was slowing down. He's fighting Reese McLaren, who's a fun little grappler. Nicky Holskin's fighting John Wayne Parr, who I thought they'd already fought, but apparently they're fighting again. Or this might be the first time. Who knows? And then Marat Gafarov is back, and he was fun until Martin Nguyen knocked him out. And then in a couple of days' time, we've got PFL is starting again. And your main event is Anthony Pettis versus Clay Collard, which should be fun because it's Anthony Pettis, always good. And he's fighting Clay Collard, who is part-time MMA, part-time boxing, and has actually done surprisingly well in boxing. He was brought in I can't remember who it was, he's brought in to lose to some prospect in the way that you are in boxing, and he won. And everyone was like, oh, Clay Collard's actually good at boxing. But he hasn't fought MMA since 2019. He's been boxing, he managed to get in a good amount of fights in 2020. He got 8 boxing matches in 2020. And then Nathan Schult is fighting Marcin Held. Marcin Held as a UFC guy, awesome leg locker, liked rolling underneath people. And Nathan Schult is a guy that we've talked about before as being a super hot prospect in the lightweight division. Really fun grappler, really fun pressure fighter on the feet, uses Like quite a Muay Thai sort of style. Has a lot of push kicks and lead leg kicks that he likes to use. Just a really fun guy to watch. Definitely worth it. And Akhmed Aliev is on the same card, the Butcher. He's great. Yeah, so I mean, like, there's going to be lots of fights to watch this weekend. Yeah, so I suppose I better let you get on with it. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. If you want to read the Rose Namajunas Long and Short Rhythm article and support the podcast and get all the other stuff that we do, I'm on a bit of a tear producing interesting content like the Hagler piece, the Sean O'Malley piece. Sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, which we will read when there's time, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Jimmy Crouton, boy genius, bless.